The alarm on my nightstand read 9:14 inches the morning when my son knocked on my bedroom door and told me we needed to go to the bank. I had my coffee in hand, still in my robe. He was already dressed, jacket buttoned, keys in his fingers, moving with the kind of energy that belongs to men who have something to gain. I asked him what the rush was. He smiled, that easy smile I'd known since he was 8 years old. Estate planning, Dad. I talked to a financial advisor. If we set up the family trust today, it saves us both on taxes. It's simple, just a few signatures. Won't take an hour. I looked at my coffee. I looked at him. Something about the way he said us sat wrong with me, but I couldn't place it yet. Give me 20 minutes to get dressed. He said sure, but he stayed in the doorway while I set down my cup. Not hovering exactly. Monitoring. That was the first thing I noticed. The drive to First Southern Bank on Merchants Road took 11 minutes. My son drove because he said he knew where parking was easier. My daughter-in-law had stayed home. She'd kissed him on the cheek when we left, quick and rehearsed, and told me to have a great morning. She hadn't looked me in the eye when she said it. I'd been a forensic accountant for 31 years before I retired. I'd spent 3 decades reading the language of numbers and the people who manipulated them. I knew what a performance looked like. I just hadn't expected to need those skills inside my own home. Inside the bank, the lobby was cool and quiet. My son moved toward the customer service desk with the familiarity of someone who'd been here before, who knew which desk, which representative, which stack of papers was already waiting. A young man in a tie stood up when he saw us coming, shook my son's hand first, then mine. "Mr. Hartwell, great to see you again. The documents are ready." "Again," he'd said again. I kept my expression neutral. 30 years in forensic work teaches you to receive information without reacting to it. I let the words sit in my memory like a coin dropped in a jar. My son was already pulling out a chair for me, explaining something about signature lines and notarization, his voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who'd rehearsed this moment. The representative spread papers across the desk. Several pages, dense with legal language, tabs marked with small yellow arrows pointing at blank lines. I leaned forward and reached for my glasses. That's when I felt a hand on my arm. The grip was firm, deliberate, belonging to someone who'd made a decision before they acted on it. I turned. A woman stood beside me, mid-40s, dark blazer, name badge reading Sandra Cole, branch manager. Her eyes were level and serious. She wasn't smiling. "Mr. Hartwell, would you mind stepping into my office for a moment? There's something I need to show you before we proceed." My son's chair scraped back. He was already standing. "Sandra, we have an appointment. This is just a routine." She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on mine. And what I saw there wasn't bureaucratic inconvenience. It was urgency. The controlled kind. The kind that comes from someone who knows exactly what they're doing and why. "It will only take a few minutes," she said. "Standard verification. Required for documents of this type." My son went quiet. The representative gathered his papers quickly. Too quickly. Like a man trying to make something invisible. I stood up. "Of course," I told her. "Lead the way." Her office was off the main lobby, glass-walled but with blinds drawn halfway. She closed the door behind us, moved to her desk, and pulled up something on her computer before she turned to face me. Her voice dropped. "How much do you know about what you were about to sign?" I told her the truth. My son called it estate planning, a family trust. He said it was about taxes. She turned the monitor toward me. "Mr. Hartwell, those documents give your son full power of attorney over your accounts, your investment portfolio, and your primary residence. Not partial, not limited, full and unconditional." She pointed to a line I hadn't seen yet. "This one authorizes him to sell real property on your behalf, without your direct approval." The room was quiet except for the hum of the HVAC. I sat down slowly. "When were these documents prepared?" She checked her screen. "They were drafted 6 days ago. Your son came in alone on Wednesday. He told the representative you were recovering from a minor health issue and couldn't come in person. He asked whether a power of attorney could be executed if a family member certified the principal was of sound mind but temporarily incapacitated. He said I was incapacitated. He said temporarily. The representative noted it but didn't flag it. I found it this morning when I reviewed pending appointments. I looked at the papers through the office window. My son was standing at the desk now, talking to the representative in a low voice, his back to us. His hands moved when he spoke, animated, explaining something. His posture had changed from when we'd walked in. The ease was gone. In its place was something tighter. I looked back at Sandra. She was watching me the way people watch someone absorb a hard truth. Not with pity, with respect for the process. "Have you seen documents like these before?" I asked her. She nodded once. "More than I'd like to." I thanked her. I asked her to keep this conversation between us for the moment. She agreed without asking why. Some people understand instinctively when a situation requires discretion. In 30 years of forensic work, I'd learned to recognize them quickly. We walked back out together. I sat down at the desk. My son's expression reset itself into patience. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I'd like to take these home and read through them tonight before I sign." The representative blinked. My son's jaw tightened for just a fraction of a second. Just a fraction. But I saw it. "Dad, the tax deadline." I smiled. "I've been filing taxes since before you were born, son. One more night won't matter." He laughed. It was the right sound but the wrong rhythm. We drove home mostly in silence. He tried twice more, gently, to explain the urgency. I listened to him explain and said, at the right intervals, and looked out the passenger window at the Tennessee hills turning gold in October light. My hands rested still in my lap. Inside my chest, something cold and precise had taken the place of the coffee warmth from that morning. Not anger, not yet, something cleaner than that. The feeling I used to get when I was 3 months into an audit and the numbers finally revealed the shape of what someone had tried to hide. Recognition. I'd been living with my son and daughter-in-law for 7 months. They'd moved in after his business closed, after the recession hit their savings, after her lease ended. It was supposed to be temporary. 6 months, maybe 8, just until they got stable, I'd said, of course. This was the house he'd grown up in. Knoxville, the same streets, the same kitchen table. 63 years old, and a widower and I had the room. The money had started in the second month. Small amounts at first. He needed $800 for a supplier deposit that never materialized. She needed $1,200 for a certification course she never completed. Then $4,000 for a vehicle repair that left no invoice. Then $11,000 for a business opportunity that he explained twice with different details each time. I had written the checks. I had told myself these were investments in family. I had let the inconsistencies slide the way you do when the alternative is accepting something about your child that you're not ready to accept. My late wife would have seen it sooner. She always could read him. That evening, while my son watched television in the living room and my daughter-in-law made something with garlic on the stove, I sat in my study with the door closed and pulled out a yellow legal pad. Old habit. I still thought better on paper. I wrote down every financial transaction I could remember from the past 7 months. Dates, amounts, stated purposes. Then I pulled up my bank statements online and went back further. 6 months before they moved in. 12 months. It took 2 hours. When I was done, the legal pad held $43,400 in outflows I couldn't account for through normal household expenses. Some of it I'd given them directly. Some of it was smaller transfers of $200 here, $350 there. Dates when I hadn't been watching closely. Dates that clustered around weekends my daughter-in-law had been home alone. She had access to my online banking. I'd shared the password 8 months ago when she offered to help me set up automatic bill pay. I'd thought it was thoughtful. I sat in my chair and listened to the garlic smell drift under my door and felt the full weight of what I'd been refusing to see. They weren't struggling. They were harvesting. I picked up my phone and called my attorney. He was a man I'd worked with on corporate cases years ago, methodical and unsentimental, exactly what I needed. He answered on the third ring, and I told him I needed an emergency appointment first thing in the morning. He asked if I was all right. I told him I would be once I understood my legal options. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I lay still in the dark and listened to their voices through the wall. Not arguing. Normal conversation. Comfortable. Her laughing at something he said. The refrigerator, opening, Footsteps. The television volume dropping. They didn't know anything had changed. They thought the bank visit had gone fine, that I'd bring the documents back signed in the morning. They thought they had a week, maybe 2, before it was done. I had tonight. By 6 in the morning, I had made 4 decisions. I would see my attorney. I would change my banking passwords. I would not let them know that anything was different, and I would find out exactly how deep this went before I moved on any of it. My attorney's office was downtown, 3rd floor, overlooking the old courthouse. He read the bank documents Sandra had allowed me to photograph on my phone, and his expression moved through several stages that he controlled better than most people would. Full POA, he said, unrestricted. He looked up. How old is your son? 38. And your daughter-in-law? 35. How long have they lived with you? 7 months. He set the phone down on his desk. Jesse, you understand what this document would have done. I understood. He leaned back. Here's what we do. First, we draft a revised estate plan today. Everything in your name, clearly structured, no ambiguity. The house goes into a revocable living trust with clear terms. Second, you need to call your bank this afternoon and remove their access from every account. All of it. Third, I'd recommend a private investigator. Before you confront anyone or take legal action, you need documentation of what they've actually done. He paused. You're not going to like some of what they find. I told him I already didn't like what I'd found myself. I could handle the rest. He recommended an investigator he'd worked with before, a woman who ran a licensed firm in West Knoxville. I called her from the parking garage on my way to the car and gave her the broad strokes. She asked the right questions without editorializing. I liked her immediately. She could start that afternoon. I drove home carefully, observing every speed limit, the same controlled deliberateness I'd used in the field when I was working a live fraud case and needed to stay invisible. My daughter-in-law's car was in the driveway. My son's was gone. She'd be inside. I found her in the kitchen, laptop open on the counter, coffee going. She looked up and smiled when I came in. The smile was quick, practiced, arriving a half-second after eye contact, like a reflex rather than a feeling. How'd it go? Did you bring the papers back? I told her I'd left them at the bank for a final review. Nothing to worry about. Probably tomorrow. She said, okay. Her eyes went back to the screen. Her shoulders dropped a fraction. I made myself a sandwich and ate it standing at the counter. We talked about nothing. The weather, whether the gutters needed cleaning, whether my son would be back for dinner. Normal conversation. I matched her tone the whole way through. That afternoon, I called First Southern and removed both of their names from my accounts. Changed all passwords. Moved the bulk of my savings to a new account at a different institution. I left $65,000 in the original account, enough to look untouched. Enough to look like the target they thought they still had. I also had my attorney file a notice with the county recorder, formally establishing the living trust. My house, every dollar of it, transferred into that trust before close of business. Whatever they were planning, the well had just run dry without them knowing it. The investigator called me 4 days later. Her voice was professionally neutral, which in my experience meant the news was not. We need to meet in person, she said. I drove to her office on a Thursday morning, told my daughter-in-law I had a doctor's appointment. She offered to drive me. I said the checkup was routine and reminded myself that her offer was not generosity. The investigator had a clean desk and a thick folder. She laid it open and walked me through it section by section. My son owed $27,000 to a private sports betting operation, not a licensed platform. The kind that sends people to collect in person. The debt had accumulated over 14 months. 2 payments had been missed. The third was due in 6 weeks. My daughter-in-law had been making small transfers from my primary account for 4 months. $150 here, $280 there. Never the same amount twice. Never on a pattern that would trigger an automatic alert. She'd been careful. Not careful enough. Total transferred without my knowledge. $6,340. There was more. She'd accessed my investment account login using the same password I'd shared for bill pay. She hadn't moved money from it yet, but she'd been in it, checking balances, checking holdings. Making a map. The investigator set down the last page. Your son's debt collectors have made contact twice at your address. Your neighbor saw them and took photos. She produced 2 printed images, men on my front porch, my daughter-in-law at the door, a handoff of something that looked like documents. She delivered notices at your residence, Mr. Hartwell. Whether your son authorized that, I can't say. But she knew. I sat with that for a moment. She knew about the debt. She'd known for months. And she'd said nothing to me while eating at my table and sleeping under my roof and steering me toward those bank documents. I asked the investigator if she'd be willing to provide an affidavit. She said yes. I thanked her, paid the balance of her fee, and drove home on back roads I didn't usually take, through neighborhoods that had nothing to do with my route, because I needed the extra 20 minutes to put everything back in its box before I walked through my front door. That night, I installed a small digital recorder in my study. Nothing illegal. Tennessee is a one-party consent state. I'd worked enough fraud cases to know the law cold. I didn't have to wait long. 3 nights later, I heard them in the kitchen after midnight. I'd left my door slightly open, same as I had as a young father listening for the sounds of a sleeping child. The irony of that was not lost on me. Their voices carried down the hall. My daughter-in-law's was low, controlled. She was the planner. She always had been. We're running out of time. If the documents aren't signed by the end of the month, he cut in, his voice looser, less careful. I'll talk to him again. He trusts me. He didn't sign last week. He got cold feet. I'll explain it better. A pause. Then her voice again, harder. Or, we go to Plan B. What's Plan B? We file for guardianship. There are 2 doctors who'll evaluate. If he gets declared partially incapacitated, he's not incapacitated. He's sharp as anyone I know. We don't need him to be actually incapacitated. We need one evaluation that says he might be. The legal standard for a preliminary order is low. Silence. Then my son, quieter now. That feels wrong. Wrong. He'd said wrong. There had been a line somewhere in his thinking, and apparently that was it. Guardianship fraud. Stripping his father's autonomy through manufactured medical evaluation. That was where the line was. His wife had no such line. What's wrong about it? She said it flatly. He's old. He forgets things sometimes. We say we're worried. We get a sympathetic doctor. The preliminary order freezes his ability to make financial decisions unilaterally. Temporary. That's all we need. Temporary until what? Until we have what we need. Then we let it lapse. He never even has to know what we filed. More silence. The refrigerator hummed. What about the gambling people? She exhaled. We give them something. Not everything. Just enough to keep them quiet for 30 days. Where do we get the account? He still has over 60,000 sitting there. I checked Tuesday. My son said nothing. He'll never notice a transfer if we do it right. Same amounts as before. He barely looks at his statements. I lay in my bed in the dark with my hands flat on my chest, my breathing deliberate and controlled. 31 years of forensic work had never made what I was hearing feel anything other than what it was. My son agreeing in his silence to all of it. The recorder caught every word. The following morning I called my attorney from my car in the driveway while they were still asleep. I played him the relevant portion through the phone. His voice when he responded was level and precise. Jesse, I need you to come in today. This changes what we file and how we file it. I told him I'd be there by 9. I also told him I needed something else, a referral to a criminal attorney. Not for me. He said he understood. Over the next 3 weeks, I lived the performance of my life. I was the distracted father, the aging widower, a little slower in the mornings, occasionally forgetting what day it was. I asked twice in the same conversation whether my son had taken out the trash. I left my reading glasses on the kitchen counter and searched for them while they watched. I made the act small, realistic, the kind of forgetfulness that's easy to believe in someone your age if you're looking for it. They were looking for it. My daughter-in-law mentioned a pamphlet on the kitchen table one morning. Sunrise Ridge Senior Living, full-color photos, smiling residents, bright dining rooms. She said she'd picked it up out of curiosity. Just something to keep in mind. I looked at it like a man who didn't understand why it was there. Then I left it on the table and made no comment. My son brought it up 2 days later, his voice gentle, careful. "Dad, we've been a little worried. You seem tired lately. Have you been sleeping?" I told him not well. "My back." He nodded. "It might be worth talking to someone, just to make sure everything's okay. She and I said I'd think about it. That evening, I transferred another $80,000 out of my original account, leaving just $14,000. If they checked, which I knew she would, they'd see the balance had dropped, not at their hands, gone somewhere else. I needed them to feel the urgency accelerating, to make the kind of reckless decisions that desperate people make when they think their window is closing. I also called Sandra at the bank. I told her I might need her to document something she'd observed. She didn't hesitate. "Of course," she said. "Whatever you need." 2 weeks before the deadline my son's debt collectors had been given, the guardianship filing happened. My attorney found it. A petition submitted to Knox County Probate Court, citing concerns about my cognitive function, signed by my son, co-signed by my daughter-in-law, accompanied by a letter from a physician I'd never seen or heard of. The letter said I'd exhibited signs of memory impairment during a recent wellness visit. I had never been to a wellness visit. My attorney filed a response immediately, with documentation. My primary care physician of 12 years provided a statement. My annual cognitive screening, completed 8 weeks earlier, showed no deficits. The letter from the unknown physician was flagged for investigation. I also filed a police report that afternoon regarding the unauthorized transfers my daughter-in-law had made from my account. $6,340. Grand theft under Tennessee law requires only a threshold of $1,000. My attorney filed civil fraud complaints the following morning. The bank froze my original account pending the fraud investigation. She found out by 3 o'clock that day. I was in my study when I heard her on the phone, her voice stripped of its usual control. "What do you mean, flagged? What investigation?" My son came home an hour later. I heard them talking in their room, voices low and fast, the unmistakable sound of people recalculating. I kept my door closed. I had a book open, but I wasn't reading it. They came to me together. That was interesting. United front, or at least performing one. My son spoke first. His face had the pale, careful look of a man stepping onto uncertain ground. "Dad, we got a call from the bank. Something about our access being removed?" I looked up from my book. "I asked them to do that, yes." He blinked. "Why?" "Because I became aware of some financial activity on my accounts that I didn't authorize." My daughter-in-law's expression didn't change. She was better at this than he was. She kept her voice measured. "What kind of activity? There must be a mistake. I've only ever paid your bills. You asked me to help." I told her that the transfers she'd made totaling $6,340 over 4 months were not bill payments. I gave her the dates and amounts, all 17 of them. Her jaw tightened. Just barely. A small tell. My son turned to look at her. "And the guardianship petition," I continued, "filed with Knox County Probate 2 weeks ago, signed by you both, citing a wellness visit I never attended and a physician I've never met." The room went quiet. My son put his hand over his face. He didn't say anything for a long moment. My daughter-in-law found her voice first. "You don't understand the pressure we've been under. The debt. We were going to lose everything. You needed my money," I said. "And when I didn't give it willingly, you tried to take it. Through fraud, through forgery, through a manufactured medical opinion, while living in my home, at my table." My son dropped his hand. His eyes were red. "Dad, I'm sorry. I didn't." "You didn't stop her," I said. "That's a choice too. We can fix this." He was reaching for something. "We'll pay it back. I'll get a second job. Just please don't." I set down my book. I pulled 2 documents from the folder I'd kept on the side table all evening. The first was a restraining order granted that afternoon, citing credible evidence of financial elder abuse and the documented threat of fraudulent guardianship proceedings. They were required to vacate my property within 10 days. My son's mouth opened and closed. The second was my revised estate plan, filed 6 weeks ago. My attorney had included a summary. My son looked at it without speaking for 30 seconds. When he looked up, his eyes were somewhere past mine. Everything I've built goes to the Veterans Legal Assistance Program and 2 community organizations, I told him. You receive $30,000. That's it. That's all that's left for you. My daughter-in-law let out a sound that wasn't quite a word. 30,000. Her voice was flat with disbelief. Do you know what this house is worth? Do you know what's in your... I know exactly what's in my accounts. I've always known. That was your first mistake. Assuming I didn't. She turned and left the room. My son stayed. He stood there in the doorway for a long time, looking at the floor. I waited. Finally, he said, in a voice I hadn't heard since he was 12 years old and had broken something he knew he shouldn't have. I didn't think it would go this far. I know you didn't, I said. But it did. He left without another word. 10 days later, I was in my study when Sandra Cole from the bank called to check in. I'd kept her updated through the process, and she'd provided her statement to the fraud investigators without hesitation. She told me the physician who'd signed the false wellness letter had been referred to the state medical board. His license was under review. 3 other similar letters had turned up during the investigation, all in the past 18 months, all attached to guardianship proceedings against elderly account holders. I sat with that for a moment. Not just me, then. She said no. But because of the report, all 3 of the other cases were now being reviewed. Before I said goodbye, I thanked her for stopping me in that lobby, for the hand on my arm, the firm grip, the decision to act. She said she'd been watching someone at the service desk behave the way my son had behaved for 3 years, and she'd missed it every time. She wasn't going to miss it again. I told her she hadn't missed anything that day. She'd seen it perfectly. They moved out on a gray Thursday morning. A rental truck, 2 trips. I stayed in my study both times. I'd said everything that needed saying. Standing on the porch to watch them load boxes wasn't something I needed to do. When they were gone, I went from room to room. The guest bedroom had been kept reasonably. A few marks on the baseboard, a curtain rod pulled slightly from the wall. Minor. The kitchen was clean enough, though the cabinet where she'd kept her coffee had a stain I hadn't put there. I cleaned it myself, put on a pot, and drank 2 cups, standing at the counter in the quiet. My son called 3 months later from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because I always answer unknown numbers. Old professional habit. His voice was different, lower, quieter than the version of himself he'd been performing in my house for 7 months. He said he was in counseling, that he'd separated from his wife, that he wasn't making excuses. I listened. I didn't say much. He asked if I'd ever be willing to talk to him in person, not about money, not about the estate, just to talk. I told him I didn't know yet. That was the truth. He said he understood. He thanked me for answering. After we hung up, I stood at my back window and looked out at the yard. The leaves were gone by then, the oak branches clean and bare against a white sky. The same oak he'd climbed as a boy, its bark scraped with the evidence of small hands and Sunday afternoons. I thought about what my wife would have said. She was a practical woman with a generous heart, and she wouldn't have been satisfied with either extreme. Not with abandoning him entirely, not with pretending nothing had happened. She would have said something like, "Keep the door unlocked. Don't leave him a key." That felt right. The civil case settled in the spring. My daughter-in-law faced criminal charges for the unauthorized transfers. The plea agreement included full restitution, 2 years of supervised probation, and a felony on her record that would follow her into every job application she ever filed. The false guardianship petition was dismissed. The attorney who assisted with filing it was referred to the state bar for investigation. My son was not charged. He had not directly participated in the financial transfers, and his name was not on the physician's letter. What he'd done was fail to stop it, fail to report it, and fail to protect his father while he lived in his house. Those failures had consequences too, just not criminal ones. He would carry them differently. On the day the case closed, I drove out to the cemetery east of town, parked on the gravel path, and walked to where my wife was buried under the same oak species as the one in our yard. Different tree, same family. I told her what had happened, the whole of it. I told her about Sandra Cole and the hand on my arm and what I'd seen in that branch manager's office. I told her about the legal pad full of numbers I'd done in my study at midnight, and the recorder in the desk, and the investigator's folder on the clean table. I told her our son was in counseling, and that I'd answered his call, and that I didn't know what that would become. That I was leaving the door unlocked and keeping the key. The wind came through the oaks above me with that particular Tennessee sound, low and continuous, the sound of October moving into November. I stood there a while, long enough to feel the quiet settle from my chest outward the way it hadn't settled in months. 31 years of forensic accounting had taught me how fraud works, how it starts small and scales with confidence, how perpetrators depend on the target's love, habit, or shame to stay invisible, how the evidence is always there if you know where to look and have the patience not to move before everything is documented. They had looked at me and seen an aging widower, a trusting father, a man who wrote checks when his family asked and didn't watch his statements closely enough. They had seen a target. What they hadn't seen was the job I'd done for 3 decades, or the patience that job required, or what a man who has spent his life finding the truth in numbers can do when the numbers being hidden are his own. They had miscalculated. That was the beginning and the end of it. I drove home in the late afternoon light, the hills rolling gold on both sides of the highway. The house was waiting, clean and quiet, every lock changed, every account secured, the deed filed in a trust that would outlast my mistakes and theirs. My name on every door. I made dinner, ate at my own table, fell asleep reading in my chair the way I had before any of this started. Outside, Knoxville moved through its evening routine, indifferent and ongoing. Inside, an old accountant who had spent his career chasing other people's hidden numbers had finally finished chasing his own. He'd found them all. He'd counted them correctly. He could rest now. And for the first time in a long time, he did. If this story moved you, please hit the like button and subscribe to Ember Vengeance. Drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from tonight. To hear the next story, click the box on the right. Thank you for being here.